In 2008, Iceland's three largest banks collapsed in a single week. Not declined, not struggled, collapsed. The entire financial system of a country with 320,000 people, smaller than most U.S. cities, just evaporated. What happened next shouldn't have happened. Instead of following the script that destroyed other nations, Iceland did something that economists still argue about. They broke almost every rule. They let the banks fail. They ignored international pressure. They even imprisoned bankers. And somehow, improbably, they recovered faster than almost any other developed nation that faced the same crisis. This isn't a story about how to fix an economy. It's a story about what happens when you re too small to be bailed out and too angry to follow orders. To understand the collapse, you need to understand what Iceland was before it fell apart. In the 1990s, Iceland deregulated its banking system. 3. Bankskaupping, Landsbanki, and Glitnir went from boring utility banks to aggressive investment machines. They took enormous risks. They borrowed heavily. They expanded internationally in ways that made no sense for a country of 320,000 people. By 2007, these three banks had assets worth more than 10 times Iceland's entire GDP. Let that sink in. The financial sector was 10 times bigger than the actual economy that created it. This wasn't just leverage. This was a bet. A massive, stupid bet that asset prices would rise forever. Bankers in Reykjavik were trading currencies, buying foreign real estate, investing in hedge funds, all while their actual economy was a small fishing nation that made its money from fish and aluminum. The math was simple. The bankers were using other people's money, mostly deposited by foreign investors in these banks. Online savings accounts. They promised high interest rates. People sent their money. The banks used it to gamble. For a few years, it worked. Iceland's GDP per capita soared. Icelanders were driving Range Rovers. The country felt wealthy, unstoppably wealthy. When asset prices started falling globally, the Icelandic banks had a problem. Actually, they had hundreds of problems, all simultaneously. The assets they bought were worthless. Their borrowing costs exploded because lenders suddenly realized they'd given billions to a tiny island betting on forever growth. And then, this is the key moment, foreign depositors started withdrawing their money. Once withdrawals start, a bank's death is math. You can't withdraw more money than you have. So within days, all three banks were insolvent. They couldn't pay their depositors. They couldn't pay their creditors. They were gone. On October 6, 2008, the government seized the three largest banks. The Icelandic stock market fell 90%. The currency collapsed. Government bonds became worthless. In less than 2 weeks, Iceland went from feeling wealthy to being completely broke. The unemployment rate shot up. Companies failed. Families lost savings they thought were secure. The emotional whiplash was brutal. But here's where Iceland's story diverges from everywhere else. Most countries in financial crisis follow a playbook. They bail out the banks. They borrow from the International Monetary Fund. They take austerity measures. They try to pay everyone back. Iceland was supposed to do this. The IMF showed up. International creditors demanded payment. Foreign investors who'd lost money demanded compensation. Iceland said no. The government let the banks fail completely. The big three didn't get rescued. They got dismantled. Depositors with accounts up to a certain threshold got protected by deposit insurance. Everyone else lost their money. That included foreign investors and international creditors who'd made risky bets on Icelandic banks. This was radical. This was unthinkable. This was also the point where the anger kicked in. Icelanders discovered that the bankers knew. Internal documents revealed they understood the risks. They knew their bets were unsustainable. They did it anyway. and they'd made millions in bonuses while building a financial Ponzi scheme that destroyed the national wealth. The public response was immediate. There were protests. People camped outside Parliament. They demanded criminal prosecution. And unlike most countries, which shield their financial elite from consequences, Iceland actually prosecuted. 40 people were convicted of financial crimes. Bankers went to jail. Meanwhile, the government made a choice about who would pay for the collapse. It wasn't ordinary citizens. The currency was devalued, which hurt savers but made exports cheaper. They raised taxes on the wealthy. They restricted capital flights so the rich couldn't hide money abroad. They imposed temporary capital controls to stabilize what was left of the economy. It was brutal. It was unfair in some ways. But the key insight was this: they decided that ordinary Icelanders would not shoulder the burden of bankers' stupidity. Here's what most people get wrong about Iceland's recovery. They think it was magic. It wasn't. It was just that Iceland did something that sounds obvious but is politically almost impossible. They let the people who made bad decisions experience consequences. The devalued currency made Icelandic exports cheaper. Fishing exports suddenly became more profitable. Aluminum production became viable again. Tourism boomed because visiting Iceland became cheaper for foreign visitors. These weren't new industries. They were the actual economy that had always existed, just returning to normal after the fantasy bubble collapsed. By 2011, Iceland had returned to growth. By 2015, unemployment was down to 4%. By 2017, they'd actually paid back much of their IMF debt early. They recovered faster than the United States, faster than Europe, faster than almost any developed nation that went through a comparable crisis. But again, and this is critical, it wasn't because Iceland found some secret sauce. It was because they were willing to impose discipline on powerful people. The banks were broken up. Creditors took losses. The wealthy couldn't escape. And the people who'd actually generated real value, the fishermen, the workers, the people making aluminum, returned to doing what they'd always done. So why tell this story in 2026? Because most of the world did the opposite. After 2008, governments in the US and Europe bailed out banks. They printed money. They kept interest rates near zero for a decade. They saved the financial system while regular people lost homes and savings and jobs. The theory was that if you save the banks, you save the economy. The Icelandic experiment suggests something different. Maybe you save the economy by letting the banks fail and protecting the people. Iceland is also a control group for what happens when you don't follow the international rules. They ignored the IMF's preferred approach. They prosecuted bankers when everyone said that would make things worse. They imposed capital controls when the financial world said that was impossible. None of it destroyed them. Most of it helped them. There's an uncomfortable implication here. If Iceland could handle a total financial collapse by making hard, unpopular choices, prosecuting the wealthy, letting creditors lose money, protecting ordinary citizens, then maybe the reason other countries are still struggling is because they chose differently, not because they had to, because they wanted to. The question that lingers is this: why did your country bail out the banks?